Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Madeline Milka, AAPI's President and CEO. Welcome to today's AAPI's Legislative Leadership Series discussion on housing issues, home ownership, and access to capital for AAPIs. Today, we are proud to present a conversation with experts from a variety of organizations to talk about all of these issues. Before we start this panel, I would like to welcome David Byrd, National Director of the Minority Business Development Agency, for opening remarks. Director Byrd was appointed as the National Director of the Minority Business Development Agency, or MBDA, part of the U.S. Department of Commerce in June 2020. In this role, he oversees the development and implementation of agency initiatives, policy agenda, and federal grant programs. He joined MBDA as the National Deputy Director in October 2019, after serving as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Office of Policy Development at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. Previous to that, Director Byrd worked as a talent scout for executive appointments and on the HUD Agency Action Team, organizing the blueprint for HUD policy and personnel infrastructure. He has more than 28 years of dedicated public service experience at the county, state, and federal levels, including executive level positions in government operations, administration, and economic development. He has served as Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for Prince George's County, Maryland, woohoo, my hometown, Chief of Staff to the Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, and Associate Commissioner for External Affairs at the Social Security Administration. Director Byrd's long-standing commitment to public service is admirable, and we are appreciative that he is joining us via phone for opening remarks today. Please join me in welcoming Director David Byrd.
Thank you very much, Madeline, and thank you to everybody who's on the phone today, not only on the phone, but joining us as part of today's conference. I'm very thrilled, happy, and honored to join with you today and tell you, for those who don't know and those who are familiar, give you some more information about MBDA. We're 51 years old this month. We were started in 1969 under Executive Order 11625. And when MBDA was started, there were 330,000 minority-owned businesses in this country. Today, there are 11 million, employing 8 million people, representing $1.8 trillion to the U.S. economy. If MBEs didn't exist, you'd have to invent them. And as part of that importance to the U.S. economy is even more so the impact that we have as MBDA on that economy. And our impact is in three ways: access to capital, access to contracts, and access to markets. In our access to capital, the agencies support minority-owned businesses gain access to $1.6 billion in capital last year. And also last year, MBDA helped minority-owned businesses secure $3.1 billion, that's with a B, in contracts, 68%, which were with the private sector. And Madeline, I want to make that point because most people think that MBDA only helps minority-owned businesses get government contracts, when in fact, almost 7 out of 10 contracts are with the private sector. And then we do access to markets. MBDA has helped MBEs facilitate more than $300 million in export transactions last year. And we have 4 export centers. MBDA has 4 export centers around the country to help MBEs that are interested in getting into the exporting game. We have a center in Chicago that helps, that focuses on Africa. We have a center in Sacramento that focuses on the Pacific and the Far East. Our center in San Antonio focuses on Latin America, and our center in Miami focuses on the Caribbean. We have 24 business centers around the country. We have 4 advanced manufacturing centers, and again, we have 4 export centers, and we have a federal procurement center, which is solely dedicated to teaching minority-owned businesses how to go after government contracts and win. You can easily, if you see the slide, you can easily see where our centers are located, or you can go on our website, which is www.mbda.gov, and you can see where the closest place is to you, who the operators are, how you can get in touch with them. Just a couple of more points I'd like to make. Under the CARES Act, MBDA was given some very specific responsibilities by the Congress under the CARES Act, of which we were allocated $10 million. That $10 million went to our, which you see on the screen, to our business centers and our specialty centers around the country. $7 million went to them, and then we took $3 million and we split it amongst some of our partners, which included the U.S. Black Chamber, the U.S. Hispanic Chamber, the National Business League, which was started by Booker T. Washington in 1900 and just celebrated their 120th anniversary last month, the National Urban League, and our friends at National ACE. So those are the folks that we split our allocation amongst for the CARES Act funding. And the Congress was very specific because there were a lot of folks that contacted us, thought that they as a minority-owned business or a minority chamber, they could get a piece of that grant, and the Congress was very, very specific on what we were to do with that money. Lastly, just want to tell you about a couple of great programs that we have. Number one, we have a program where we take folks out of incarceration into entrepreneurship. One of our partners is Georgetown University, where they just graduated a class of brand new entrepreneurs, of folks who came out of incarceration. We've got a brand new program with Amazon, where if you're a minority-owned firm and you've got some goods and services to sell, we've created an online academy. Once you go through that academy, we can put you up on Amazon's platform. And then lastly, we've got a great program called Enterprising Women of Color, where we've got a series of online webinars that we do from time to time that promotes women of color who are entrepreneurs, who want to learn from other women, the lessons learned, because 25% of all new businesses in this country are started by women of color. And our last series that we did in May, we had Taraji P. Henson from the Empire Show join us. We had 2,500 women of color join us on that program. Our sponsors, our partners in that are Coca-Cola and the National Minority Supplier Development Council. So I thank all of you for inviting me to join into your conference today. We are a big supporter of APEX. We want to continue to be. You're a big supporter of MBDA. If MBDA wasn't around, you'd have to invent it. That's how important we are to the U.S. economy. Thank you so much, Madeline.
Thank you, Director Byrd, for getting us started today with your remarks. We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. We have an amazing lineup of panelists today and a lot to talk about in this short time together. I'm thrilled to get us started by introducing today's moderator, Lisa Hasegawa. Lisa is the Regional Vice President for the Western Region at NeighborWorks America and has more than 20 years of community development, housing, and public health experience. Lisa previously served as the Executive Director of the National Coalition for Asian Pacific American Community Development, or National Capacity, where she led the coalition of nearly 100 community organizations for more than 15 years. In 2017, Lisa returned to her alma mater, UCLA, where she served in several capacities, including Assistant Director for Federal Affairs, Policy Fellow at the Asian American Studies Center, and Policy Analyst for the Chancellor's Advisory Council on Immigration Policy. In addition to teaching an undergraduate course and guest lecturing, she serves as a mentor to graduate students at the School of Public Affairs as a Senior Luskin Fellow, and to undergraduate Native American, Pacific Islander, and Native Hawaiian students as a mentor for the Supporting Undergraduates Natives program. Lisa recently served on the board of the Little Tokyo Service Center, a NeighborWorks network organization, and also previously served on the boards of numerous advisory committees for government-sponsored enterprises and financial institutions. We are so thrilled she could join us to share her wealth of knowledge and moderate this conversation today. As a reminder, for those joining us on Facebook, please put your questions in the comments section. And if you're joining the webinar, please use the Q&A chat box feature. Lisa, it's all yours.
Thank you. And I will just ask all of the wonderful panelists to turn on their videos. Wonderful. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Madeline. It's nice to be back doing this session today with the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. I don't get to do that as often as I used to. So we have with us a wonderful panel, and I'm going to ask each of them to go and just maybe give us a 2-minute introduction of yourselves and the organizations that you represent. And so I'll start in the top corner here with Hope from ARIA.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you for APEX for hosting this important panel discussion on housing and capital access. My name is Hope Atwell. I am the Executive Director for the Asian Real Estate Association of America, or ARIA for short. ARIA is a trade organization with about 17,000 members and 41 chapters in the United States and in Canada. And we are all about promoting home ownership and moving the needle of home ownership for the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. We have been in existence for, my goodness, 17 years now, since 2003, founded by John Long, Alan Okamoto, and Jim Park. And have done great things for the community, removing barriers that are challenges, again, for homeownership. So great to be part of this panel. And again, thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Hope. Look forward to talking to you more about homeownership in Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. I'm going to go down to Seema, my successor at National Capacity. Seema, tell us about all the great things you all are doing.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, everyone. Seema Agnani. I'm the Executive Director of National Capacity. I have been in this role for more than 5 years now, came in after Lisa. National Capacity is a member organization, so we have about 100 organizations based in API communities around the country. Our members are predominantly working on issues of housing and economic justice. We are a HUD intermediary as well, so we run a housing counseling network, essentially where our member organizations provide really critical housing services in order to preserve and support local API communities. I used to work with one of our member organizations, Chaya CDC in Queens, New York. So, I was there for many years before joining Capacity on staff. Thank you.
Thanks, Seema. Margarita.
Thanks, Lisa. My name is Margarita Satini. I'm the Executive Director for the Utah Pacific Islander Civic Engagement Coalition. I'm also an organizer with Sierra Club. And really our goal is to really bolster the civic engagement of our community. And again, I think I brought this up with our group the last time we met, and I said, housing is not my area of expertise. We came upon this because how COVID has really shed a light on the inequities within with many of our communities of color. But we also realize the importance of home ownership and having a vote and how it provides you power when dealing with your city council, with your legislators. Home ownership means you get listened to. So definitely not an expert, but in this field, for the opportunity to seek housing relief for our communities who are being heavily impacted by COVID right now. So I'm also an Apex leadership graduate. So I went to their leadership training and graduated a few years ago. So that's on my resume as well. Thanks.
That's great. That's great, Margarita. Look forward to having your voice in the conversation. Daniel from ACE, National ACE.
Hi, Lisa. My name is Daniel Oliver. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the National AAPI Chamber of Commerce and Entrepreneurship, also known as National ACE. We're a national nonprofit organization whose mission is to serve as a strong advocate of AAPI business interests and effect positive change on all issues that enhance and advance the goals and aspirations of AAPI business owners. I want to thank Madeline, Milka, and everyone at APEX for providing the space for today's discussion, and also thank MBDA Director David Byrd for his remarks and for his strong leadership during this very trying time for minority businesses across the country. At National ACE, for the past 7 months, we've worked closer than ever with our national network of more than 60 affiliate chambers and partners around the country to ensure that the API business community has the most accurate and up-to-date information about the resources that are available to them during this pandemic. We've been concentrating mainly on providing technical assistance to help tackle many of these issues, and in helping businesses with financial assistance and access to capital. So thank you very much for having me on this panel today.
Yes. All right, we're just going to dig right in. I am excited to talk about this topic here today. We're going to be talking about housing issues, homeownership, access to capital, and wealth inequalities. And so I think that all of you have something, very relevant, to say about this topic. But I wanted to sort of start off with sort of the impact. I think all of you sort of mentioned it in your introductions, but if we could dig a little bit deeper into the impact that COVID has had on the communities that you serve and the issues that your organization is tackling. And so I'm actually going to start with Margarita. She mentioned it it's okay, Margarita. I think that, your lived experience is super, I think, very powerful and, just really illuminating for the policy issues, right? That all three of the other organizations are, working on every day. So I think that, I wanted to start with you. You started to talk about that. I would say to you that homeowners have power, but renters and tenants and even people who don't have homes at the moment, can be powerful as well. But Margarita, why don't you talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing and sort of how you came to this issue of housing?
Yeah. So at the beginning, during March, when we were all ordered to shelter in place, we didn't have any resources to turn to. So our community pulled together and started having community discussions around COVID. We had no idea what it was going to look like. We just knew that this was happening and these are the things that we need to tackle. And at the time, it was really health. We were worried about how are we going to test our communities. In fact, in Utah, the Pacific Islander community still holds the lead as having the highest infection rate in all of Utah, and we only make like 1.3% of the total population. So the very beginning was tackling the health, the primary effects of COVID. In the coming months, it has now become a fight to provide housing relief, utility relief, food insecurity relief, and we've had so many people from our communities approach us and say, hey, we are essential workers. And we've recognized that many of the people in our communities are essential workers. So they can't leave their jobs. They go to work. They are, at risk of bringing home, this virus. And the sad thing is housing instability looks a little different for us. You'd be hard pressed to find like a Pacific Islander who's homeless, but you will find multiple families stacked in a small living space. And if you have several essential workers, even one essential worker who's going out into the field and brings that back home, if you have multiple families living in a small space, that virus is going to, run that house. It's going to ransack the house, and everyone then will be infected, and that just continues to increase our numbers. But we are seeing an increase in the need for housing relief, and it's really difficult because as a nonprofit organization, especially a community of color, an organization of color, we're partnered with other organizations who have discretionary funds, and our job is to filter, these applications through this process, which I don't think is right. I think, if the government has funding that's supposed to provide help to our communities, it should go directly to the organizations of color who are dealing with those communities on the ground, right? So we definitely we've put out we don't have a whole lot of, I know that Capacity has data on Pacific Islanders. We also started our own survey to try to collect data from our own communities about what housing stability they're facing, what that crisis looks like. And so far, we just barely put it out. We've had 50 families, respond to our survey. And right off the bat, every single one of them live in multi-generational home. And whether or not that's normal for us, but that really truly is, in my mind and a lot of other people's mind, what housing stability looks like for Pacific Islander communities. And it would be nice to have policies in place that make it easier for people like us to be owners, and to be able to take part in, building generational wealth for generations to come, just from owning land. And we don't even have that. So I hope I answered your question, Lisa, but
Oh yeah, no, that's great. I definitely, we can put some links in the chat to where folks can get data on home ownership and housing statistics for Pacific Islanders if they're
I
interested.
appreciate that.
So then, Seema, I'm going to turn to you next, and then maybe I'll go to Hope, and then we'll talk a little bit about small businesses. So Seema, I know that National Capacity is working a lot on the CDC announcement related to the rent moratoriums and all of that. So can you tell us a little bit more about how that information is or isn't getting out to our communities and sort of what you're seeing through the Capacity member network?
Yes. Yeah, so much of what Margarita said really applies across our network. I think National Capacity really focuses on the low-income parts of our community. The API community has the greatest income inequality of any other racial and ethnic group in the US. So what that means is the top 10% are making 10 times as much as the bottom 10%. Not to throw out too many statistics, but really to say that, we always acknowledge that, yes, there are these wealthier parts of our community, but we have extreme poverty on the other end. And that's really the community that National Capacity is focused on. So in terms of the housing, the health and housing has never been more intertwined, is something that our industry has been talking about it for a while, but I feel like COVID really revealed those connections in a way like we never have seen before. And so, in terms of the rental side, the CDC recently announced an eviction moratorium. Many people felt that was a win. That was something that many of us have been pushing for. However, what it didn't do was offer resources for renters then to pay their rent and get caught up. So what we have now is sort of a standstill, if you're lucky. We're worried that there will be a real eviction crisis coming very soon when these moratoriums are lifted. So, every state had approached the issue for renters very differently. And so some states had strong protections, had already put in eviction moratoriums, and others did not. And so the CDC coming in was helpful, but legislatively, we need resources for tenants to catch up on their rent, because now, we're already hearing stories of landlords, threatening tenants with eviction immediately upon the moratorium being lifted. So, that is really an unanswered question and something we're continuing to push on. I would say more broadly for APIs and the housing solutions that have been offered to date around COVID, nothing has been done in language. And that has been a major challenge for all of our groups. And so our groups have had to, collect food donations, deliver them to community. They've had to, for those that own properties, have had to make all the adjustments that other landlords have had to make. And they've had to translate everything and try to get the information out into the community. So, we're really proud of what our groups have been able to do. There's so much more need out there.
Yeah. Thanks, Seema. Hope, I think that it's renters, but it's also homeowners who, I think what Seema was saying, I was talking to her earlier about how folks are not necessarily taking advantage of the forbearance options. They don't, know a lot about it. That information also is not getting out to folks. So talk a little bit about what ARIA is doing in that space.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. I think at the beginning of COVID, that was one of the things that we certainly were very worried about, right? What is going to happen? We didn't want it to be reminiscent of the last housing bubble. And I think what was certainly helpful was to work with Fannie and Freddie. And I think they quickly mobilized their resources to provide in-language services and support and materials for homeowners who may need assistance, whether it's forbearance or what have you during this time. The issue is that as you had mentioned, these materials, and Seema might have even alluded to this, these materials may exist, but it's hard to kind of like put it to the ones who need it. And Lisa, as you said, a lot of our community members are not even sure how to take advantage of this. And don't know if you remember this, but at the beginning of the whole idea of the forbearance, there was very little information on how forbearance would work, right? There was very little guidance even on, okay, after the third month, is it a balloon payment, right? Is it extending the loan? And I think lenders were also confused on what the guidance would be from the agencies. So it's still a concern, obviously, for our community, particularly those who may not have access to the resources that are in language. And so it's great to be working with organizations like National Capacity and other type of like agencies that have access, direct access to our community members. I think that's a big concern right now. You know, now that forbearance is coming to like a close after that third month, what does that look like? And I know you were going to also ask or talk about small business owners. We know that a lot of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are small business owners, and they're greatly impacted by this. And we're hoping that there's not a great deal of foreclosures that will be a result of this COVID crisis. So that's something that we're working on, Lisa.
Yeah, thanks, Hope. And do you want to talk a little bit about some of the homeownership statistics? It's sort of like 1 foot forward and 2 steps back.
Yeah. Well, what is amazing, and I'm sure that you're hearing this on the news, is second quarter report, right? Which from U.S. Census, it typically is they publish the quarterly housing report at the beginning of the next quarter. So we got second quarter report back in July, and homeownership across the board, right, has increased. I think. Thanks to low interest rates. If you can find a home that you can afford, now is a really good time. But our homeownership rate has increased from 58% in the first quarter to now almost 62%, right? And that's historic. That's a great milestone that I'm sure you can agree to, Lisa, because no other race has actually exceeded that 60% mark than the non-Hispanic whites. So that's a big, obviously, big milestone and big deal for our community. But you take a look at really where we are, where we typically live, where we, as the Asian American community and Pacific Islanders, we typically live in high-priced cities, gateway cities, right? So migration patterns right now do show that we are moving to the south, which is much more affordable, much more small business friendly, and all of that stuff. And even if you drill down deeper on the statistics from U.S. Census and American Community Survey, the growth in homeownership is actually experienced in the south. So some of you might be surprised that there's a big Asian American migration in Atlanta, right? The Carolinas is another one. Texas is, Texas, what, 10 years ago? If you look at Texas, they probably didn't have a Chinatown in the last decade, but now, Chinese Americans, Filipino Americans, Vietnamese Americans are moving to Texas and generally in the South because of the opportunities and affordability.
Yeah. Thanks, Hope. Seema, I will get to you, Daniel. Sorry. Don't worry. I haven't forgotten you, but I want to dig into this issue of, the data with homeownership. And I think that Margarita as well. So if you look at the disaggregated data, right, for homeownership, and as Seema was saying, we're one of the most, we're as an AAPI community, we have some of the greatest wealth gaps. So Seema, I was wondering if you could give a little more detail on sort of how National Capacity thinks about homeownership.
So yeah, in terms of the data, just quickly, so the HMDA, the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data is really what the industry uses to look at how we're doing on homeownership. And, you know, over the past, you know, I don't know, decade, probably National Capacity really has worked on ensuring that there is disaggregation and increased data available around subgroups within our population. Because, you know, again, if you look at it at the whole community, the AAPI community collectively, you don't see the nuances. So I'll share a link to a report we recently did in 2015. Under the previous administration, we were able to ensure that the CFPB was collecting data that included API subgroups. So we could see the differences between, you know, Indian, Chinese, Vietnamese, and the Pacific Islander community as well. And so we did our first look at that data. The first data set that included that information was released in 2018. And so I'm going to share that report, but really what it did find is that there are, of course, significant differences between different communities in terms of, you know, whether we're purchasing new homes, refinancing, and also the cost of those mortgages. You know, we found disproportionately certain parts of our community, the Filipino, the Pacific Islander, and Vietnamese communities were really paying a lot more for their mortgages and not getting conventional loans. In the end, it was $1,800 was the average additional cost that those buyers or in refinance situations were spending on mortgages. So there are great differences. And so what we want to do is apply those same approaches to small business lending. And for that matter, in how we're tracking COVID response. You know, to date, we still are not tracking how different racial and ethnic groups are feeling the impact of this pandemic. And so we're really hoping to get those same type of approaches to data in on the small business side.
Awesome, thank you. So Daniel, Seema talked a little bit about how a lot of national capacity organizations are responding to the food insecurity needs in communities. And one of the creative solutions that have come up that I'm aware of, you know, is that, you know, they've actually been working a lot with small businesses in a lot of the ethnic neighborhoods, like restaurants, right? So there's sort of this collaborative effort where they're paying $10, for example, per meal to a small business that really needs the business. And then they're charging residents who need the food like $3, and then communities sort of subsidizing. So that's been sort of one really kind of creative two birds with one stone, if you will, kind of approaches that has actually been an effort to try to, you know, support the small business community in a lot of API neighborhoods. So talk a little bit more about what National ACE is doing and how it's been impacting your communities, because we know that there's been a lot of anti-Asian racism.
That's exactly right. Even before there were these mandatory lockdowns in various states back in March, we know that API businesses were suffering because of anti-Asian sentiment. In March, for example, nationwide, 60% of all Chinese restaurants were closed. And we know in large part that's not only because of the pandemic, but because of the anti-Asian sentiment that was accompanying the pandemic. And so much of the API workforce is related to restaurants. But what we just found out from a report that came out through Yelp, they did their September Economic Impact Report. 60% of businesses that closed in March because of the pandemic will now remain closed for good. And so that's if you had to close because of the pandemic, there's a 60% of those businesses are now going to be permanently closed, which means they're not going to be able to get back on their feet. And so one of the things that we've been doing, and again, data has been a huge problem. We don't know exactly how APIs specifically have been affected by a lot of this. In fact, National ACE, we're going to end up doing our own survey that's launching this week to try to get a better handle of how this is affecting the API business community. but we've been working really hard to get as much accurate and timely information to the community as possible about the federal resources that are available. And so as Director David Byrd from MBDA said, National ACE is the recipient of some grant funding that was outlined in the CARES Act. And what we've been doing is partnering with our local and regional chambers and affiliates from around the country to provide this geographically targeted assistance based upon the needs of that area. And a lot of that has been to figure out mainly what the needs are. Of course, access to capital, we know there's never been a level playing field for minority businesses. And it's always been a struggle. Now that we're in the midst of COVID-19, we know that this problem has just been exacerbated. And we don't have available data on how many AAPI businesses applied for PPP. We don't know how many applied and were denied. We don't know why they were denied. We know anecdotally that there's lots of them lots of businesses that were not able to get any of this federal assistance that was being offered. But we don't have the numbers. Of course, there's language barriers associated with that as well. The SBA was given $25 million in the CARES Act to provide in-language services. That came out months after PPP had already ran out, and then they reopened it, and the rules keep changing. And it's been a very confusing process. And so we've been trying to get the word out as much as possible, partnering with officials at SBA, with MBDA, trying to just get the most accurate information and letting people know what their options are. A lot of businesses in the community just simply don't know what's even available.
Yeah.
So it's been a challenge.
Thanks, Daniel. Margarita, I'm going to try to bring you back into this conversation. Have you seen impacts on Pacific Islander entrepreneurs and small businesses?
I do know. We were able
please.
to identify. Oh, I'm so sorry, Lisa. I thought you were. I apologize.
No, please.
Oh, okay. So we identified 75 Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander businesses out here. And a lot of the complaints that we received from many of the Pacific Islander businesses is that they applied and they were denied, or they tried to apply, but it was too much work, and it was too complicated, and they didn't have anyone. And I've also had people say that they couldn't find a bank that would work with them to get this loan. So there's the reasons are many, but I've seen it within our own community. And so one of our business partners, who's just right across from my neighborhood, I asked her, I said, it would be a great idea if we could put together some type of a Zoom meeting just for entrepreneurs to come in, and you can walk them through the application process so that they feel like they have somebody who's championing their cause, their business, and so this is an idea that we've been talking about, and it'll probably happen real soon. But really just somebody who will support them. I mean, a lot of them probably need a little bit of hand holding through this application process. They don't make it easy. They don't make it easy even for rent relief or mortgage relief, all of the documents that we have to fill out. And it's kind of depressing a little bit, to have to see all the documentation, because they're pouring out their lives. They are exposing them, they're making themselves vulnerable so that they can get the funding that they need to be able to keep their families under, in a house. So those are some of the things that we're faced with. But the plan is to kind of just put together some kind of a meeting that will walk many of our small business owners through.
Well, maybe you can have some Daniel and somebody from Capacity and
I would
Aria
love that.
on the call.
I would love that.
Seema, do you want to talk a little bit more about the work that Capacity members are doing on small business?
Sure, thank you. So, similarly, I think, we've done our best to work in partnership with, National ACE as well as other organizations, CDFIs around the country to really—
Can you say what CDFIs are?
Oh yes, apologies. So Community Development Financial Institutions are essentially community-based lenders. And, a lot of the policy solutions that advocates have been pushing for really are trying to drive resources through CDFIs as well as SBA, the Small Business Association lenders, because many of those are rooted in communities and will reach the smaller businesses. The challenge for the API community is that we don't really have enough CDFIs in our community. So we have a really unique challenge as a community, and it is very much related to our capacity, pun fully intended. I think, we are very clear that that is our mission moving forward, is to help build that capacity around the country. And in order to think about how we respond to this crisis, but also in the long run, how do we help preserve all these small businesses and neighborhoods that we hold dear and really want to help encourage the growth. So, what we've done is we established a community resilience fund to try to help fill some of the gaps in funding that our groups were facing. So we granted more than 800,000 to groups. We prioritized those communities where we knew there's a lack of resources. So we really centered the Pacific Islander, Southeast Asian, and South Asian communities. So we do have materials in language from those groups. So because we weren't able to meet all the needs, we're really relying on our members that are doing this translation work to share across. So we're also connecting the dots that way. And I see that there are a few questions around renters. I just wanted to share that we have an upcoming webinar on that issue. I think there's a lot of confusion about how groups can respond. So that's a good place to gather more information about what the moratorium means, and we'll share whatever in language resources we have there as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. Daniel, do you want to talk a little bit more about sort of if COVID was to go away? No. Are there some things that you would really want to be focusing on in terms of access to capital? I mean, Seema talked about community development, financial institutions, and CDFIs, they actually can do mortgage lending, they can do commercial lending to small businesses, and they can also do lending for affordable housing. So we definitely need that capacity in the API community. There's only a handful of them. I think there's several that are considered CDFIs, but they're minority-owned banks, which is a little bit different than the community-focused CDFIs. So Daniel, what are you all thinking about in terms of access to capital sort of for the long haul?
That's a good question. We as in National ACE, as in the U.S. government, as in everybody's been so reactionary and just trying to play catch up when it comes to COVID-19. PPP came out and everyone's like, what is this? And should I get it? And I don't know what it is. But again, historically, minority businesses have just had a huge problem getting access to capital. Through your, at every step of the way. Traditional lending sources, when minority businesses do finally get access to loans, they're usually smaller loans. They come at higher interest rates for no other reason than the fact that there's a minority applicant. And so this has been something that we've been fighting for a long time. And you heard the MBDA director, David Byrd, was saying that they concentrate on three major things. One of them is a whole federal agency, a third of the time is devoted to minority access to capital. And so there's lots of different things that can be done. Obviously, as I mentioned, breaking down those barriers to in-language services would definitely help. Providing just resources and information just about what services are available, and that's where we've been trying to play a role. But we need lending institutions to also adopt policies that promote fair lending and prohibit lender disparity. And we need increased transparency of small business lending, and we need to know what's happening so that we can help fix the problem. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to make capital more available to these API entrepreneurs. And these inequities are just going to flourish. there was a question I saw in the chat, if I could answer it.
Sure.
It was the question was for young APIs who are starting their lives and entering the workforce. How do you suggest we adapt to build our capital surrounding the pandemic? It's a very good question. It's not easily answered, but we do have at National ACE, we have a next generation of entrepreneurs arm. It's called ACE Next Gen, and they have just launched a 6-month free program called Level Up. It's for young APIs who can learn how to get the mentoring they need and learn about resources that are available. All of the information is available on our website, acesmallbusiness.org. And all of the services that we have are 100% free. We also have one-on-one business consulting for free that we're trying to get more and more people to take advantage of. If you're a struggling business and you need help with pivoting your business or anything like that, you can give us a call through our website and we can put you in touch and you can have free one-on-one business consulting. And so, as I said, these issues, they're so multifaceted. It's not a chicken or the egg sort of question. It's all of these things are just happening at once. And I really wanted to praise everyone at SEMA and National Capacity for the nonstop effort that they're doing over there, especially with providing, they've been translating stuff that, you know, all over the place. It's just, they've been so helpful. They've been so active. And we're proud to call National Capacity a partner as well.
Shout outs to SEMA all around and the whole team. SEMA, is there anything else that you like specific, where I think there's another question around specific housing assistance. Would that be like the housing counseling organizations and the capacity network?
I think, you know, a lot of our member organizations establish mutual aid funds and do their own fundraising. So, you know, it's really different by each state. So I encourage people to look at our website and find the member organization we have in your area. That might be the best way to do it, or housing counseling agency would certainly have that information on the HUD website. Yep.
Yep, and NeighborWorks as well, nw.org and nationalcapacity.org. Just to wrap up, just sort of this round of general discussion, I wanted to just turn to, you know, sort of the changed landscape related to racial justice and Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in that conversation. I know that there are a lot of policy issues also that are changing with regards to like the Community Reinvestment Act is being discussed and a lot of those issues. So I was wondering if Hope and SEMA, you might want to talk about sort of the CRA and the fair housing challenges and maybe just more broadly about how your organizations are working collaboratively with other communities of color.
Sure. Seema, you want me to start? Yeah, as it relates to fair housing, I think there's a general concern, I know, within our membership regarding implications of COVID. I think Daniel had alluded to the fact that a lot of the small businesses, particularly Chinese restaurants, have been impacted by this, right? I mean, it's too bad that we have a general, just this whole anti-Asian sentiment right now that is not, you know, unfortunately the current administration is not being very helpful about this. I know for our members, we have heard anecdotally that there is some concern on homes that are owned by Asian Americans. You know, there's possibly discrimination about the homes being listed as someone that's being owned by an Asian American couple, right, or a family. And I think before COVID, everybody might be familiar with that Newsday article in Long Island about just fair housing, why that's still, you know, discrimination still exists, right, whether it's implicit biases or what have you. And, you know, it is a big concern for us, Lisa, whether it's discrimination that we might not be wanted in certain communities, right? Whether certain communities will not welcome Asian Americans, or there's discrimination on folks who are trying to sell their homes. I think this is an issue that we could continue to closely monitor as an organization, and working with organizations like Capacity and others as well.
Thanks. Seema?
Yeah.
And then Margarita, I'm going to call you again after Seema, so just a warning.
I mean, you know, definitely issues of discrimination and fair housing and fair lending are a top priority for us. And, you know, I think there are a lot of, you know, this administration has really taken the funding away from a lot of that work, has really repealed a lot of good work that happened previously that we will continue to fight to reinstate. You know, but speaking to the CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act, you know, that's really core to how we do our work in the community development field. And really, you know, it came after the civil rights movement, essentially to address issues of discrimination and redlining across the country. And so right now, the Community Reinvestment Act is being discussed for reform. It definitely needs reforming. Everyone's in agreement about that, you know, because right now, all the online lenders, there's really nothing regulating. FinTech is what we call it, you know, financial technology. So we definitely need to reform CRA to ensure that we hold those institutions accountable also to communities of color. So that is work coming ahead, and I think National Capacity will definitely be involved in that, and many are watching it, you know, because I think as we see the racial dynamics really emerging across the country and the need for us to work in solidarity with other communities of color, you know, National Capacity has been working with other civil rights organizations on the national level to respond to some of these attacks on fair housing, and certainly looking forward at CRA. You know.
Thanks, Seema. Margarita, you don't need to know anything about CRA or any of that stuff, but just sort of how do you see sort of housing discrimination or just discrimination, you know, affecting your community and their access to whether it's housing or services or small business loans? You talked a little bit about it before, but anything more that you wanted to share related to how you think your community might get more involved in some of the advocacy?
I definitely want to, I mean, I'm sitting here and I actually feel like I'm an audience member because just because there's some of the great minds that I am actually sitting here and listening to. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm actually taking notes and taking down everyone's contact information. You will be hearing from me. But I do want to make sure that my community has access to be able to for that process to be smooth, that they're not being faced with discrimination. But we're already dealing, like some of our West Side neighborhoods, we're already dealing with gentrification. You know, there's already conversation out there amongst the more affluent about purchasing homes in areas that have been predominantly communities of color. These were safe spaces for us. They are no longer safe spaces anymore. You know, we're seeing things in these communities that we normally wouldn't have never seen before, you know, where, you know, other demographics are jogging with their dogs and walking with their, you know, you're starting to see like these little changes. Coffee shops are popping up all over the place. These are sure signs that stuff is changing. The neighborhood and the demographic in the neighborhood is changing, you know. And I've heard from people who have been pushed out of their community that they're having a difficult time finding somebody that will give them a loan so that they can purchase their first home, or that they can, you know, retrofit their home for, you know, to be more energy efficient. Like they're just having difficulty, you know, getting access to these resources. And we already know that this has a lot to do with racial policies, you know, and you know, if you have a different name on that application, you may not be looked on favorably as you would if your name was something else, you know. So yeah, definitely I'm hearing these complaints, and we're working closely with other organizations to see what can we do to make homeownership, you know, more accessible for our communities.
And Margarita, show us your shirt. Nice.
It was a little cold over here because I'm like, I didn't put my sweater on.
No, just talk more about that. Tongans for Black Lives. Was there a group locally in Utah that that put that together?
No, we just have a lot of Pacific Islanders who, were allies to the Black Lives. I've spoken at like several Black Lives Matter protests, and I have a close relationship with the leader of the Black Lives Matter chapter out here in Utah. And, in my mind, we're the beneficiaries of a lot of the work that has come from Black movements, like civil rights, and one of the conversations that I'm having a difficult time because Utah is such an uber conservative red state. Many of the members in our community are also think they identify with the Conservative Party, but I'm sorry if I know this is a nonprofit organization, and
you're just describing your community. It's fine.
I'm just describing my community. So, and just having, right now we're in the process of, we've been creating and mobilizing members around one of our police departments that has been just horrible in their treatment of people of color and just people who don't fit their mold, and so it's volatile here just like it is everywhere else. There's social unrest everywhere. So,
Seema, Hope, or Daniel, did you want to talk anything more about sort of how you're working with other communities of color? I mean, well, Seema, you already talked about that. Daniel, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We've been working very closely. We were pre-COVID-19, but so much more now during COVID-19, working closely with the U.S. Black Chamber, as well as the U.S. Hispanic Chamber on a number of issues, as well as the National LGBT Chamber. But we know that this is it's been a sensitive topic, I think, for the AAPI community and the AAPI business community, because we at the same time want to make our voices heard as well, but we understand that we understand how we got here, and so we've been doing our best to say, do not forget about our community as well, and at the same time, this is all necessary and good and needs to happen, and so we've been working very closely with our partners in the minority community.
I think it's so important to center the needs in Black communities, and that's been needed, long overdue. And I've been appreciative sitting where I sit now of all of the work that you all have been doing in terms of leading AAPI communities in that space, and just tackling the anti-Blackness within our own community as well. So, so yes, I appreciate all of you for taking all of that on. I wanted to just turn a little bit to 2021. Are there some convenings that you all are having, some strategy sessions? Like, what are you all thinking about 2021? Actually, Apex was interested. And also, I guess the other thing I would just say to close us out, if there's no more questions, let's see if there's any other questions in the Q&A. There's one question actually about homeownership that increased to 62%. Do you believe that this trend will continue going into 2021? And there's another question about, has race been an issue for AAPIs transitioning into homeownership? That's sort of a big question. I mean, certainly I think that for a lot of AAPIs, housing discrimination is still very real. And the lack of wealth and different kinds of credit, I would say. Maybe Seema, you could talk about that. And there's a specific question for you, Daniel. Hope, do you want to talk about homeownership into 2021, whether you think that's sort of a blip or a long-term thing? And then Seema.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, that question persists, right? Will we continue to see an increase in homeownership rate? And you see economists, even from NAR, predicting, and other economists predicting a strong housing market and even gain in homeownership in the next few months into 2021. what I think is unknown is really the long-term impact of COVID with small business owners, with our jobs. There's so much still uncertainty, right? You talked about insecurities, but there's also financial insecurity. There's job insecurity for a lot of us. And we don't know really how long we're going to be in this particular circumstance. And we hope that we can get out of this soon. So it really depends how long this pandemic is going to go, and what's going to happen too with the elections, right? We're thankful that rates are still historically low, interest rates. Again, that's, I think, propelling homeownership, if you can find a home that you can afford. So there's a lot of, I think, factors, Lisa, that could dictate this. What's going to happen with elections, what's going to happen with interest rates, our inventory going to continue to be tight, or will we see foreclosures that's going to kind of like mirror what had happened in the housing bubble 12 years ago, 13 years ago? If that happens, then, there's going to be a crash then. But it doesn't seem to be whatever is happening doesn't seem to be indicative of that. So a lot of economists still predict that we are optimistic with housing prices and homeownership. So we'll see. We will see. Yeah. But we take the positive and the optimistic approach to 2021.
Thanks, Hope. Seema, do you have a different take on that? I mean, I think that obviously, with the lower income communities, I am concerned about sort of foreclosures and impacts on folks' credit and gig economy workers.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree that it really depends on the policies we put in place now to respond to it. So speaking of 2021, I mean, we're really going to be pushing for bold investments in not just home ownership, but for renters and small business owners. Really, home ownership and small business are the two primary ways to build wealth in the country. And so these two issues are really, top priority for us. And, as much as we can all organize around supporting or pushing for better relief and recovery for our communities and other communities of color, the better. So far, the housing industry, the homeownership, is doing okay, but, we will wait and see. I think it's too soon to tell.
Yeah, I think that we've been feeling like the can keeps getting kicked down the way a little bit because the unemployment benefits have continued, the expanded unemployment benefits, and the housing eats, or what did you say? The house eats first. I think that's the saying. And so people are cutting so that they don't, so that they can continue either as renters or as homeowners. And once that stops, we're concerned. At least NeighborWorks, we've been, sort of trying to figure out, what we might do in that case. Daniel, I'm going to bring you into this conversation because actually, small business ownership and entrepreneurship oftentimes actually, because that is predominant in a lot of immigrant communities, that sometimes has an impact also on people's access to home ownership and vice versa, because it's the way that banks look at your credit. So I don't know if you have any predictions.
Predictions, I do not.
No crystal ball, Daniel? No,
I mean, these are such uncertain times, and it's frustrating and it's difficult, and we're hopeful. What's interesting, there was this Facebook survey of some 86,000 businesses a couple of months ago that really just outlined everything we knew, that talked about how businesses are closing, revenue is down, employees are down, people need access to capital, they need access to contracts. But what was interesting is that the vast majority of all of those businesses remained optimistic about the future. And so that was good to hear. I hope we can all remain optimistic, and hopefully we can turn this thing around. But you know, it sounds like so much of it is going to depend on, you know, what happens with this virus. If we can get over this hump of fall and winter and get a vaccine and, you know, just turn the corner on this thing, I think we will start to see some improvements. But I think this is also, it's an important time to highlight the inequities that are out there, because as I said previously, they've only been exacerbated by COVID-19. And so it's really important that we make our voices heard now, and we let people know that that, you know, when we do, if we ever, you know, back to normal, whatever that might look like, that we've put systems in place that can help fix some of these very long-standing problems.
Thanks, Daniel. Margarita, what do you hope for 2021 and the years to come for your community?
I am hoping for a brand new administration. That's just me. And
now that is, you know, probably you shouldn't have said, but okay.
Okay, sorry about that. I mean, as me, as a private citizen, this is what I would hope. But I really just stronger policies in place that I hope that we don't have to go through this again. Like, I'm a huge advocate for, you know, universal basic income. If we would have put, you know, direct money, cash resources into the hands of the people, we definitely we'd see an impact on the economy, but I don't think it would be as great if we had these policies in place to help everyday people, you know, and where, you know, the government gave us a $1,200 check and said, God be with you, good luck, you know, and left us to our, you know, to our own vices. And then, you know, I mean, we're seeing a lot of money coming from, you know, philanthropy, but for me, it's, you know, paying your fair share of taxes is way greater than philanthropy, you know what I mean? And having those monies being budgeted out and shared equally with the people. But, you know, I'm very disappointed in our leadership. We are lacking major leadership at the top, lacking moral, you know, courage, and, you know, we continue to spike in our COVID crisis. You know, I'm hearing reports from epidemiologists and scientists and researchers that by the end of the year, we should hit a death toll of 400,000. Where in the world is that okay? You know, it's not. So I'm very worried about our AAPI community, you know, and again, just like everyone else has said, and I echo everything that everyone has said, this virus, this pandemic has really exposed the inequities that we have been going through and we continue to go through. And now we have an opportunity during this social unrest to show up and tell people at the top, this is the world we want to live in. And the only way that's going to happen is at the ballot box. So my biggest hope for everyone is that everyone shows up and votes, and that we vote in the world we want in 2021.
Thank you, Margarita. Hope, give us some hope.
Yeah, we need a lot of hope, right? I just wanted to add, and thank you, Lisa, for giving me this quick opportunity. We all know that commercial real estate has been greatly impacted by COVID. We already are seeing some of the hospitality space in New York being transformed as their temporary shelter for the unsheltered, right? But we're also seeing a lot of this office and retail space being converted for other purposes. And so I think we're going to continue to see adaptive reuse of commercial real estate. And I don't know, maybe this is something that is hopeful for affordable housing in the future. Seema and I are part of the KPAC Housing Task Force, and we talk about, you know, tax incentives possibly and zoning restrictions and all of that stuff. But I think with, again, commercial real estate being impacted greatly, it's something that we should need to take a look at as an opportunity to address housing needs, particularly affordable housing needs in the future.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to start wrapping up. I don't see any other questions there. So thank you, everybody, you know, for all of your contributions. And we covered a lot of ground in terms of the impacts in our communities, some of the policy issues, predictions for the future. some scared, some hope, and everything in between. It's been a lot, I know, for so many of us who are out there supporting nonprofit organizations that are really working day to day with impacted folks in our community. So any just sort of last closing words, and then Hope, I'll count that as your closing words, and we'll go to Margarita, and then Daniel, and then Seema.
My apologies for my comment earlier and being and being very political. But I just wanted to say thank you, Lisa. What a phenomenal job you've done, like, facilitating this discussion. And also very honored and grateful for meeting, Daniel, Seema, and Hope, and the work that they're doing. And I hope that we all continue to push forward our agenda to make sure that there is equity in all things, whether it's, energy efficiency, economics, health, that I hope that we in the future get what it is we've been fighting so hard for. So
thanks.
I thank everyone for that.
Yeah, Margarita, it was one of the gifts of facilitating this was to get to meet you. So thank you for your voice. I have enjoyed getting to know you too. And we'll go to Daniel. And before you go, Daniel, to the young person who wants to know whether they should become a homeowner, there are lots of resources online about, how to make that decision. So I'll lead you to Hope and Seema and NeighborWorks. You can find a housing counseling agency and help. You can get some help with your budget and sort of figuring out when homeownership is right for you. Daniel.
Yeah, so I was answering a lot of the questions by just typing them. I assume the people answering can see those somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So Lisa, I would just want to say it's great to see you. It's been so long. Thank you very much for having us today, and of course, always a pleasure working with Seema and Margarita. It's been great meeting you, and Hope as well. This has been fantastic, and I just wanted to also thank Madeline for allowing us to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Seema, you want to close us out, and are there any calls to action?
Yeah, well, also echo all the thanks to AAPIs and Lisa. Always wonderful to be in conversation with you and my colleagues. It's been a great discussion. I guess some closing thoughts is, I do have a lot of hope based on, what we've been seeing lately, the uprisings around racial justice really give me a lot of hope that maybe this country is finally recognizing some of the work we need to do. And I'm hoping that as we move to solutions, none of us were satisfied with how things were going before. Mm-hmm. So, I feel like the leadership that we do have in our communities is really where the solutions are. Yeah. And all we have to do is lift up those voices and listen to people like Margarita to get to where we need to go.
Totally agree. Thanks, Seema. I'm going to hand it back over. Thank you, everybody. Great conversation. I hope it was helpful for folks. And I'm going to hand it over to Madeline.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to all of the panelists for having such a dynamic conversation today and sharing your time and insight with all of us as we learn more about these issues. I know it's a volatile period, and so having your steadfastness is so important to this community, and appreciate everything that you have talked about today. We have one final panel left in our legislative leadership series. That is this Thursday, October the 1st at 2 p.m. Eastern. Join us as we wrap up the series with a powerful discussion about exploring the diversity in the AAPI community. We know the AAPI community is far from a monolith and includes such a vast array of ethnicities, nationalities, religions, cultural groups, and languages. While we work together to advocate for our community under this label, we know that the needs of many different groups within the AAPI umbrella are not always the same. Thursday's panel explores different identities within the AAPI community by bringing together diverse voices to talk about unique issues their communities are facing. We also invite you to join us later that evening for APAC's celebration, Asian Prom, going virtual. So register to join us on Thursday, October the 1st at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. You can RSVP to participate in all of these exciting events by visiting the APEX website at www.apex.org. Thanks so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.